Ladies and gents, welcome to episode 34 of the Intention podcast. Glad you guys are here and really excited to introduce you to a guy that I'm a huge fan of today. His name's Mark Dobson, and for those who have never heard of him, Mark's a performance coach, he's a lifestyle strategist, he's worked alongside some huge names in the sports scene and in the business scene, including Olympic medalists and multi-million dollar businessmen. He's a guy that I was introduced to in 2005 when I was in year 12, and he was traveling around Australia speaking to schools on the subject of mindset and performance and personal development, really. I remember the moment I heard him speak, I knew I was going to be a huge fan of what his message was about. And ever since that time, I've revisited his work quite a lot. I've been to a few of his events, and his work is just continually relevant. It's something that you have to keep going back to just as a refresher. And I'm so excited to get the chance to introduce you to him today. More than just a performance coach, though, Dobbo is a guy who has been through the journey of transitioning from employment with other people to working by himself. So I think this is a really relevant message to anyone out there who's starting up a business and thinking about the challenges that they're going to have to go through, maybe feeling a little overwhelmed. I think Dobbo's story is really inspiring, and just the steps that he took to get from where he was to where he is now is one that we can take so many lessons out of. So I had to laugh when I called Dobbo this morning. He said to me that he's still driving his car at the time of the podcast, but I was amazed at the quality of the audio. I tell you what, I'm going to have to start recording podcasts in a car because he sounded like he was in the most beautiful studio that you could put together. So a couple of times throughout this conversation, you're going to hear cars going past, you're going to hear little indicators. But you know what? It's just an amazing conversation. One thing I love about Dobbo is the fact he's just a genuine guy. There's a lot of phonies, for lack of a better term, in this field that Dobbo and I are involved in. And I think you get a lot of hype and a lot of false talk. But Dobbo has always been a really genuine, he's a really honest, he's a really practical and helpful coach. And guys, you're in for an absolute treat. So let me get out of your way and introduce you to the great man from Australia, Mark Dobson.
I'm the soul challenger, I'm the road damager. Now behold the cold and the straight magical. Cause the sky brings flowers and the strong grow weary. The heroes built blood and the blast and the fury. Pray on the power and pray to your father. Cause all of the quakes in the universe resonate to your heartbeat and your faith.
My introduction to you was in, rewind the clock, about 12 years now. It was 2005, and I just started year 12 at Gippsland Grammar, and we had a camp to kickstart the year. I think the teacher's plan was to get us inspired and get us motivated, and to be honest, the school camps were never something that really excited me that much, so I sort of went along by compulsion. But once I got there, they told us that we were going to have a speaker just come and help out with mindset and goal setting, and not even goal setting. It was a far broader approach than those two things. And I remember you were introduced to the class, and pretty instantly, man, you had my attention. I was already really into the style of, I was into the things that you were teaching. There was a lot about mindset. And I remember by the end of the session, we had about 3 sessions, I think, in one day. And then I think you followed up with us the next day. I left motivated. I left inspired. I just held a fresh appreciation for the journey that I was about to step into. But I remember leaving there feeling inspired and thinking how relevant that message is to so many people in so many fields. And I was thinking, I'll just love as a start to hear a little more about the people that you actually work with and why people come to you to seek your help.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember that camp. I think I do. There was because I ran so many, and I'm just trying to place it. Was the school Gippsland Grammar or something? What was it?
It was Gippsland Grammar. Yeah, I wish I could tell you where the camp actually was, but it's completely slipped my mind.
I've gone to so many of them through the years, but look, my background was I ran youth programs for 20, 25 years all around the world, and now I've got a few years under my belt, and I'm fairly established, and where now the people that come to me are usually athletes competing at a very high level, although I had a real focus on that for the past 10 years, but in the last 5 years, it's really very talented business owners and leaders, and that usually they're growing something and they're frustrated because they can't get their entity to the next level. So often it's an athlete, they win, they got silver medals and they want to get gold. And that's no exaggeration. That's the sort of conversations we have. And then with the leader, it's the person who's built a pretty significant entity and they've hit a ceiling where it's beyond their skill set. They need to be able to be at their best, but also understand the space they're moving into and who they need to be as a leader, as a performer, and as a strategist to be able to achieve some unique goals. So, I've had athletes last 4 Olympics, that sort of thing. One of the guys I coach is worth just short of $1 billion. Like they've become big people now. But also, it's interesting that it's like one of my challenges is that I just like to help people, but when you start to talk like that, people need to hear that for street cred. But it also, one of my challenges, it becomes always like name dropping at the beginning of presentations. Now I have to say, listen, guys, I'm not trying to drop names. This is just my job, So if you don't mention, what that person's financially worth or what they achieved or what, then they're like, oh, you just, living in shadows. And if you mention it, then you think you're it's just a bit of an odd situation, as I didn't expect that, as I always thought I needed to have some decent qualifications. Now I got them, and people just think, shut up.
So you mentioned that you started out at youth work, and I've read a little bit about you through your website, and I've obviously heard a lot about you through the scene and through a couple of the events that you've put on. But, man, that journey and that transition, and I guess just the growth that you've been through as a business person, as a coach, and as someone that can go to take their game to the next level it's really inspiring to me, and I think it's really inspiring to people who are starting up their own businesses and their own sort of journeys. But I can imagine that transition from working at a youth group where you took it for a few to a few hundred people, and then now you're working with some of the most successful people in their fields. I can imagine it's not only exciting, but it would have been a journey of many challenges and things like that. What kind of length of time are we talking about here, Dobbo? From the time that you were working in youth to where you are now, I would love to hear about a few of the ups and downs. If you could walk us through it to how you got to where you are.
Yeah, well, when I used to run the local youth club, I got involved, and the good youth club's got 30 kids, and I managed to get it to 100 really fast, and then more, and I learned that the rule to make it work, it was like a canvas for me. It was like a medium. I enjoyed being creative, and this was creative with people. I didn't language it like that back then. I just had an opportunity as a creative outlet. But when I learned that if you remember everybody's name and you give them something they can't get anywhere else, then they kept on coming to the youth club. And then I worked on American summer camps, and I was promoted quickly there because I had a skill set which I went there to test myself in honesty. But then one of the challenges was I'd go to American summer camp, and I'd work, and I'd have a job, and I'd be the director and have a lot of responsibility. And then I'd come back to Australia, and we didn't have that industry here. So I would try to promote myself as a speaker. And I remember the first time I sent out a brochure that I was going to be a speaker, I sent it, a letter to the principals. And back then it was very expensive to get things printed. And now it's just, you can churn it out. But I remember I finally, created this beautiful letter and a business card and all this kind of stuff to send out, and we received them, and the word principal was spelt wrong. And just, so it broke me. And so anyway, we go back to the printers, we print them again, and it cost me a fortune. And then we send them out, and I must have sent out about 100 at first, and I got 4 calls and two speaking gigs out of it. And that was a good start, but a lot of people saying, well, what do you actually talk about? And on it, I was too broad. I was like, I do communication and, responsibility, leadership. I was too broad. And one of the challenges was, one, to define what the value was that I brought by being a speaker, because a lot of people say they want to be a speaker, but it really is what value, what's the audience going to benefit from, and what problem do you solve? So as I matured, I learned that what I really did was I was able to engage the unmotivated student, or I was able to shift a culture in a school. I was able to have people engage in their study with really alternative study skills. And so when the teachers heard that, they go, we need that. But in the early days, I couldn't define that. So what would happen, I'd get a job, but I wouldn't necessarily get another one. And I even found that even though my personality and the amount of time I'd spent across in America clocking up skills in front of audiences, it meant that I picked up the odd corporate job as well. But generally, I'd get one and they would, thanks very much, but it didn't create repeat work. And And honestly, I paid myself less than the dole for 6 years.
Wow.
And it was so difficult. And I remember having fights with my family because they cared about me. They were really desperate. They were saying, like, Mark, this is killing you. And I'm like, you don't understand. I have to do this work. It's in my DNA. And occasionally I'd look through the newspaper and look for a job out. I think maybe I'm going the wrong way. Maybe this is not going to work. But sure enough, I'd apply for them occasionally. But I wasn't a match. Like, I was much better at doing what I do now. But there was no degree. There's no structure. You're just walking into no man's land trying to find an income.
And at what point did that start to change for you? Was there sort of a tipping point in your own career where schools started to say, rather that you didn't have to start contacting so many schools, but schools started to contact you? At what point did that happen, and what sort of caused it to flip?
Well, I think people want to do the same sort of job and not going to like hearing this, but it took about 6 years. I remember reading, I think it was in the E-Myth or something, about, most businesses, don't really survive until they hit the 6 year mark, and then there's this momentum. And I remember thinking, oh, that's rubbish, I'll be able to smash that. And sure enough, it was fairly accurate. And a couple of things started to happen. There was one defining moment that I really remember, and that was that I'd finally got a school gig. Now, I wasn't getting many gigs at all. Like, I don't know how I don't even know how I was getting by looking back. But I remember going to the school gig, and there'd been a confusion about the dates. Now, I don't know if they made a mistake or I made a mistake, but there was 2 speakers there. So they sent me home. And my fees were so low. I was such good value because I just wanted to be so available and accessible. And I was just devastated. I was furious. I was offended. And then I got home, and the phone rang with another school asking me to come and do a job, and then the phone never used to ring. So I've answered this, and they've said, look, we've heard about what you did, which I've got no idea how the hell they heard. But they're like, we want somebody for this particular teacher evening or afternoon. And they said, how much is it? Now, I think I was charging $250 a session back then. So I just said, I was just so annoyed. I said, $700. And they were like, oh, sorry, we don't actually have that in the budget. And I said, oh, okay, I understand. And they hung up, and I hung up, and I ran to my room, and I bawled my eyes out till morning. I was a mess. The morning, the bloody phone rings, and it's at school, and they say, listen, we found the money. We'd love to have you along.
Wow.
And, and I was like, okay. So, it was just that. It was that, when they say it's darkest before the dawn, like, there's that ray of hope. And then I had another circumstance, and I don't know how this company found me. And I think that's really important if anybody's doing a similar sort of journey. Like, the marketing's really important. We live in a very crowded market right now. Everybody's posting on Facebook and considers that's an ad. Well, you're posting posting that you're a coach and something, but you're not up against somebody like me, but I don't even bother posting on Facebook of any significance because I just use a community of people I do a really good job for, and they tend to be word of mouth. But back then, somehow this lady heard about me, and she calls me up and says, listen, we'd love to have you at a conference in Singapore. Now, I'm like, geez, this is massive. Someone's going to fly me to the national. And at the time, I had a friend from America with me, and we just got out of the water from surfing down in Geelong, and I'm trying to speak to her seriously on the phone, and he is dancing naked in front of me. And he is really disrupting me. Like, he knows me so well. He doesn't know what work I've got, but he knows me well enough to know how to, like, upset me. So I'm trying to focus, and I'm trying to look away from him, and then so I go outside of the hotel room. It's freezing, and he's got his butt up against the window, and I end up saying to this lady, I said, listen, I'm really sorry. I've just got out of the surf, and my mate is dancing naked in front of me, disturbing me, and I can't give you the attention that you need. And she goes, all right, what if I call you back in 10 minutes? I was like, that'd be great. So I hang up, but then I realized I don't have a phone number. And she doesn't call back in 10 minutes. And I'm just broken. I'm like, I'm so annoyed at him. He's like, relax, Dobson, don't even worry about it. Sure enough, about 10 minutes later, like, what was I, 10 minutes later, after we've had a big Barney, about after an hour waiting, she calls back and she's speaking to my boss. She goes, that's the kind of spirit we need at this conference.
Oh, my gosh.
And I get the job. And so, like, I wish there was a science about how that stuff happens, but they were two turning points where I thought it was gone. I thought it had slipped away, and it was actually in my almost finding my identity, finding not being a pleaser, but having some strength about what I do and who I am. I realized looking back, it gave clients a lot of confidence that he must know if he's prepared to be that almost that bold, with not being arrogant, just being strong.
It's actually a really great point, and it's funny that you bring that up because later in the year, so I mentioned the camp at the start of this conversation where you came and spoke to us, and I'd love to get back into a few things you spoke about there a little later in the conversation. But later in the year, our school had you back because you obviously did an amazing job at the camp, and everyone was raving about sort of the work and the lessons that you brought. But later in the year, you came back to the school and you were running a session, and there was one guy in the back of the audience, and he was constantly chatting. And I remember I was sitting close enough to him to hear him, and he was sort of annoying me. I was thinking, I just really want to hear what you had to say. Anyway, out of nowhere, most speakers, I would assume in that moment, would just bear with it, and everyone else in the room was completely engaged. You had everyone, and this guy was just being an idiot. I don't know what it was, but you stopped the conversation and you said, "Mate," and he looked at you, you go, "We're not here to fuck around. So if you want to keep talking, you can piss off." And everyone was like, holy shit. And I remember that so clearly. And I remember my heart stopped and I was like, I can't believe this guy just said that. But this guy did not say another word. I remember he came up at the end and he was so apologetic. But what happened from that moment was everyone in the room realized how dead serious you were and how serious you were about the lessons that you were bringing in. For me, I thought for this guy to be that bold, for this guy to be able to stop an audience and say so clearly what he's thinking, he's obviously very serious about the message that he's bringing. And I think that's one thing I've always liked. I've been attracted to your line of work about is because I feel like whenever you do bring a message to an audience, you're bringing not only a message, but you're bringing a heart and an honesty and just a real genuineness that I think this field can miss a real lot of. It can be a little bit of a phony field where, you know, you play all high and mighty, you can be Mr. Nice Guy or whatever, but I thought that unique approach, it was just so refreshing.
It is refreshing. It's got me in some trouble, that. Thing is that sometimes one of my things that I really value honesty. Like if someone's got a bit of food on the corner of their mouth and you're not paying attention to what they're saying, I feel like it's more honest to say, oh, there's some food in the corner of your mouth, not because you're trying to correct them, but they're going to go to the mirror later and go, oh my God, why didn't nobody tell me? And I think a lot of times in life, people are not getting the legitimate feedback they need. Sometimes people are boring, and we don't want to offend them saying boring, but they actually are lonely. And you say, look, you're going to have to look at the way you interact with people, or what's your intent in a conversation, and it's difficult because you don't want to be unsolicited in this. But in a situation like that, if he's impacting the people around him, that's what really upsets me. He doesn't have to learn, but there's other people. I know that what I've worked on. It's my art, it's my craft, and I'm really passionate about it. But I get more upset when someone is interrupting someone else's learning. Unfortunately, I'm so passionate that every now and then not a lot of times I have dropped the F-bomb in front of an audience. It seems you are there. If it's an adult audience, it might happen. But the thing is that, you know, and some schools haven't loved that through the years. But the truth is that kid, he's so resilient to all the other polite messaging he gets. And some people see the politically incorrect it is if you like, or how that, you know, to use a swear word, but they don't actually see it's love. Yeah. It's who else has actually been strong for that kid and said, mate, you are stuffing up your life. So there you go. So you remember one of those days. Great.
It was incredible. It was a small highlight amongst a whole lot of other great things. But when you mentioned the boldness that lady from the Singapore the Singapore presentation mentioned, I couldn't help but think of it. But so one thing that I'd be really interested to hear, man, is with the scope of people that you're working with, there's obviously a lot of different lessons that you're bringing to the table. So can imagine from a person who's worth close to $1 billion and a year 12 school student, you're obviously speaking about a lot of different things and working with a lot of different strategies. But I would love just to hear a little bit more about some of the strategies or some of the things that keep coming up in the work that you do? Is there any sort of repeat things that you notice you're addressing time after time in your presentations and your one-on-one stuff?
Yeah, well, so I don't actually speak in schools anymore. I retired from that about 18 months ago.
Mm-hmm.
Really because it just professionally didn't stretch me anymore after 20-something years. And one of the things I realised, that I always thought youth was my passion, I actually realised personal growth and being able to impact people's lives in really healthy ways, the passion. It's just that I started with kids because that was accessible to me when I was one. As I got older, I still love to make that impact. However, I started to realise that it doesn't have to be teens. I actually just got to a point where it just didn't stretch me and I was empty up the front. And so, yeah, just so to mention, like, so another stage of growth, I had to let go of that. Was a big move. But you're right, though, the things are consistently the same. And there's a book I'm actually working on, it'll be finished in about a month, called 7 Conversations for Success, because I find I actually just keep having the same 7 conversations. And I'm happy to explain what they are, but before I expand on that, the power actually before any content, I really believe if you're well intended, it really wouldn't matter what you say. That's why things like tarot cards and similar, they work, because people, they can hear what they need in the story. The thing that is most important is the rapport. And somebody said to me years ago, what you do best is you have the ability to have empathy with where people are at, but you're able to also then connect them to the vision. But if you've only got vision but not empathy, then people can't connect to it. And if you've only got empathy, then people stay where they are. And so when you say what keeps coming up, the number one thing is your capacity to have rapport with people, to get along with people quickly. And then you can have an honest conversation. And that means that, I've been in so many situations where somebody's lost somebody like really, really close. This person's in a lot of pain, and they will open up to me in a massive way just in the break. But because they feel like I understand them. And that's really what rapport is. Somebody, and you would have had the experience when you heard me speak, you would have thought, God, like he knows my world. He gets me. And that's, so before you have those 7 conversations, you always have to make sure that the people that you're with feel understood, and not don't tell them you understand. That you can know they understand because they start to ask questions. They you can see their eyes, and they try to progress the conversation forward. So with those 7 conversations, like it would always start with vision. So we're always pitching, where do we want to be? And so if it's a student, it's like, really, what do you want your year to look like if you're, doing year 12? And I tell the kids, it's just a stupid social ritual. It's not like you came out of your mum's womb going, bang, I'm here to do incredible my final year of school. Like, it's not a life calling. It's stupid. Yeah. It's a social ritual, but in that you're allowed to have your idea of how you want it to look. And so with an athlete, it's, there was an athlete I worked with many years ago, and he had a goal to win a medal at the Olympics, and he did. And then he had no motivation. And I said, yeah, because you had a goal, not a vision. And he says, what do you mean? I said, well, your goal was to win a medal. A vision is to die an icon of the sport.
Wow.
And I'm like, that's a really different game, because then you would just keep winning medals. And so the first question is, what's the vision? What are we trying to do? And really if you were being you, if you were being you and getting involved in things that you love over a long period of time, what would be the end game? And it's very general. So for me, it's to die leaving behind a body of work. So it's something that I can do infinitely. At Walt Disney, it was to build a land. It wasn't a park. It was a land, Disneyland. Like he said, he even openly said, this will never be finished. So that gives you a lot of momentum, and then that allows you to have the second question or the second conversation, which is, geez, if you're going to do that, what skill would you need that you probably don't have right now? So, and then it's like, well, if you had that skill, what would you need to believe that you may not believe right now? And then we have really significant conversations around that, because, sometimes people say, I'd have to believe, that it was possible. I have to believe that people would want to invest money in this, or I'd have to believe that I'm the kind of leader to do it. And then we have to have a conversation, because sometimes they just don't believe that. So there's the same things going on and on. But it always starts with your ability to rapport. If you don't have rapport, then people you're just noise.
That's such a good point. That's such a good point. Actually, just while you're, I don't want to interrupt you while you're at it, but I've just been reading Warren Buffett's book, The Snowball Effect, I think it's called. I can't quite remember. I'll put it in the show notes and correct that. But one of the things that he was speaking about was the vision that he did have, and I think it sort of just hit a real point with me what you just said then, because I think a lot of people, and I'm obviously a lot newer to the field than what you are, but I think already I've noticed that one of the things that a lot of school children, and not just school children, Dobbo, I mean people of all ages that I come into conversation with, it seems as though they lack a lot of clarity on what they're actually trying to create. I think they sort of wake up and maybe go through the motions, and I think there's something to be said about the fact that, you know, we're doing what we're told to be doing for so long that we never, a lot of us don't take the time to consider what it is that we would actually like to see. And I love your point just there about starting with the vision, because I think once you at least have an idea of what it is you're trying to create, like Walt Disney, he said, I want this to be a land, then you can aim towards it.
So on the vision thing, it is a good place to start. And I think that you're right how people get a little bit distracted. They don't know what their thing is. They just go through the motions, and they've been institutionalized. They've been told you need to get, you know, this grades at school, and then you need to go do this at university, and then you need to get a job that's going to be first year level, entry level, and there's this formula to go through, and then you should have a partner by now. You've got to buy that house, and I've really thrown that out the window, and I really think the things that because in contrast that people are trying to look for some big like defining clarity around this vision, which is quite simple. Like with Walt Disney as an example, he started with a mouse. He was just drawing a mouse, and what the consistency is between the mouse and the land, he's following what interests him and he enjoys doing. And so for me, when I was young, what interested me and the idea was just working 3 days a week.
Yeah.
So I didn't necessarily know what I was going to do. I thought I'm going to run a camp, and I had my own camp. The kids came on for 15 years or something. And I'm going to run a camp, and I only ever want to work 3 days a week. And that was it. And it matures. And so it's like, you've heard that metaphor where you're driving a car, and if it's at night time, you can only see 200 meters in front, but you keep moving forward. So sometimes people are waiting for 12 doves to fly across in the shape of the cross saying, this is your thing, and it's not. So what you've got to lean towards is what gives you a warm feeling inside, what makes you smile. Be very general. So if you like, watching YouTube, or you like, I don't know, like knitting, or you like watching old films or something, then that's enough. That's enough. Just acknowledge that and build that out. So for me, when I was traveling and I was 21, I was traveling around Europe, and I kept on doing what I thought you should do as a tourist. I'd go to all these museums and I'd go to these sites. And I started to realize I was bloody miserable, and I was on my own, and I was the boss. And eventually I decided that the way I was going to travel was I'm going to arrive to a city and just walk. And I'm just going to walk and walk and walk and walk, and whatever happens, happens. And on the fourth day, every fourth day I was going to rest. I was going to give myself permission to not have to achieve anything, not have to see anything. And further, I even got to a point where I was questioning faith and religion. I even got to a point where I was like, because this is a long journey, where I said, you know what, God, I'm going to even call out, you don't even exist. I'm prepared to say that. And I threw everything out. And it took a while, and it was scary. But I was getting rid of all the expectation that the community had put on me, and traveling was allowing me to do that. But it was difficult, because you constantly have this internal dialogue. And even as a self-employed person now, you'd still have that dialogue. Many days I have to tell my friends and family when they think my life's so cruisy. I'm like, yeah, but if I get up at 10 o'clock one day because I can, I still have that dialogue with myself that says, just probably should get into the day. And I'm like, well, actually, and I have to remind myself, well, actually, Mark, you've created a life where you don't always have to get on with your day.
Yeah.
So it's a constant conversation. And I think it's important for people to know that voice that's talking to you isn't a real voice. It's just a voice, and you can talk back and you can instruct it. And you just tell yourself, no, well, today I'm getting up late.
Yeah.
The end.
That's a really interesting.
So,
sorry, man.
No, they go on. Like that's it, right? It's but people are looking for it to be more complex, and it's that simple. It's like when you wake up, what do you want to feel like for breakfast? Eat that.
Yeah.
And if you can't, and you want to recognize what you enjoy, and it will become a muscle.
It's a really interesting point, and I think I relate to what you're saying really well, because before we started recording, I mentioned that I'm in the transition of working as a school teacher into more of my own stuff, speaking in schools, sort of the early days of where you were at. But one of the things I've noticed is in the days off where I'm not at a school and there's not structure and there's not, you have to be here at this time, at this bell, you can eat at this lunch, and I think one of the things I've wrestled with is what you're saying there. But one thing I'd love to hear your opinion on, man, is in those moments, I think even though I have a fair amount of clarity, or I would say a lot of clarity on what it is I'm trying to achieve, what it is I'm trying to implement, I think there's times where I'm constantly thinking, no, I need to do more, I can't relax, I can't switch off. And I think I know on a personal level that that approach isn't necessarily healthy, because a lot of the time I'm just doing busy work. I might go and check my emails for the 12th time just so I feel like I'm doing something. But if I was to be honest with myself, I would know that the action is having no real big impact on my day. How did you get to a point? Was it just through self-dialogue, or do you sort of relate to that feeling that I'm experiencing? And how did you overcome sort of that personal challenge of creating your own day in the style that you liked it or wanted it to be created?
The challenge is exaggerated when there's no money. So if you've got money, you feel like you've got every right to sit there and do whatever you want. So really, part of that is you feel like you should be earning a certain amount per day, if you like. Yeah. Beyond that, if someone's earning a certain amount, then they might have a personal goal which they haven't moved towards, or they're competing with somebody and they think, I want to outperform that other business or that other industry or something. So there's usually, it starts with some sort of expectation. And I've got a few thoughts on this. One, I'm really passionate about being exactly who I am and being that perfectly. And as part of that, I sort of think about life like a dog. Like a dog eats when it wants to eat, it runs when it wants to run, sleeps when it wants to sleep. And I try to listen to what my instinct is. And if you wake a dog up when it doesn't want to be woken up, it doesn't enjoy that. And the same thing where you try to work when your body doesn't want to work, or your instinct is. So I've started to listen, in a practical way. What does that mean? And I start to notice when I'm most potent, where I'm driving something forward. So the way I see work is that there's things that are obligations that you just have to do. You have to reply some emails and stuff. There's stimulus, where you get text messages and phone calls where you have to sort of respond if you choose to. And then there's time where you spend working on things where you're driving something forward. I make sure that for the stimulus, I've really put boundaries around that, so a lot of it doesn't get to me. My obligations, anytime I repeat something, I try to see if there's a way I can systemize it so that someone else could do it, or at least it can be faster for me. So an example might be with a lot of emails, often we're rewriting the same thing. So I've got a lot of paragraphs pre-ready to go. And I've also organized my calendar, so if somebody wants to book a time with me, I've got a link for the different types of meetings that I can send them. And so rather than going back and forth 10 times, can we do this time, can we do this time, I've got a link that allows me to do that. And then I try to make sure I recognize when I do things that drive something forward. And what I sort of believe is that in a week, as I observe myself and others, only about a third of your week is really driving stuff forward. A lot of it, the rest of it is just doing functionality. And to really drive your week forward, it's really important to be able to recognize what the potent task is. And I don't see that can happen without silence. And sometimes that's the shower, where that time where it's the pause before you get involved. And that's what we need, to be able to just have that time where you switch off somehow and you step away from it. And I like to know that my mornings are when I'm most potent, and that's when I'm going to drive stuff forward. In the afternoons, if they're a bit wishy-washy, I'm doing this sort of crap or phone calls, etc., I'm okay with that. And then on a broader level, I feel like if you took a month, what happens in a month or a year is there's also a pattern. At the start of a month, you might take some big, bold actions, and that's driving your business forward and creating life. You've made a phone call. Like this year, earlier in the month, we bought some land. And, that's like, look at the land, make some phone calls, negotiate, bang, big decision. Now, that feels very productive, but then after the big move, there's lots of little details that happen for the rest of the month. So there's these patterns, cycles. And once you start to recognize where in the cycle you are, I feel like the anxiety backs off and you can just be in what you're doing, and you can be driving something forward if you're driving, you can be doing obligation if it's obligation, and you can be responding to stimulus if that's where you're at. If you're giving us, it's the anxiety thinking you should be doing something else that's the problem.
Yeah, so it's just having a lot of clarity on what part of the actual journey you're in. Because I think what stands out to me about what you just said then, what really hits home is I think a lot of the time, and a lot of people that I speak to who are in the same scene as me, who are starting out their own thing, and I guess the territory that they're standing in is a little unknown. They've been used to having someone constantly bark at them about what they need to do, and now it's been left up to them. They go, shit, I'm not 100% sure which way to take this. And they find that when they're sending emails, they think, I should be working on writing more content. Or when they're working on social media, they think, oh crap, I should be sending emails. And I think, what you said there is just, hey, know which part of the journey you're actually in. When you're actually in that journey, when you're in that process, you can just have confidence, which goes a long way in doing that part of it really well.
Yeah, so an easy way to do that, I make all my phone calls and all my email responses after 1 o'clock in the afternoon. So that means that when I'm working on my own things in the morning, say writing a blog, then I don't feel anxious thinking, I've got to do that, I'll contact that person, because I know I'm going to do it in the afternoon. It's scheduled, so the anxiety backs off. But if you don't schedule it, then it's hanging over you, feeling like I should really be doing that thing. So a lot of it is just allocating a time. And when something's in your diary, the heat goes off. So for me, the mornings are mine, and the afternoons are obligation and even coaching. I coach in the afternoons, so because it's so easy for me, and it's not that I'm taking the foot off the gas, not giving them 100%. It doesn't require any creative energy.
Yeah.
But the mornings, for me, I'm a morning kind of writer and morning creator.
Yeah. Okay. Is most of your coaching done face-to-face, or do you do that over Skype, Dob? I can imagine you're working with people all around the world.
It really depends. A lot of it's done on the phone. So I've got a few athletes in America, which is we would rarely do face-to-face on Skype. We would just have effectively a phone call. And then occasionally I might go to one of their events through the years, like I've gone to Aspen for the Winter X Games and things like that. Or I might turn up to a horse riding event where I'm just sort of watching to get a feel. I don't really need to be there, but sometimes that happens. With corporates, I tend to be one-on-one. Actually, the way my coaching package works, which might be valuable to people, is people hire me for a month. Well, essentially, usually it's for a year or 3-month chunks, but say let's we think of a 1 month chunk, and in that 1 month there's one face-to-face and there's one phone call. And because I found that sometimes people think they need a coach every week for accountability, but in my experience, for me, the way I coach, one conversation will have a massive impact, and then we just need to do some detail later and tighten it up, and at the end of the month we could do it again. And really, for a lot of my clients, even meeting once a month is too often, because if it's the right decisions, the right strategy, then it puts a lot in play, and they're pretty smart cookies. They can work the rest out.
Yeah. What kind of stuff are you going through with these athletes? Because I used to be a middle distance runner. I didn't mention when I heard you speak in year 12. I think that was the most exciting part for me. I thought, far out. Okay, right. I've been focusing a lot on the physical side of this journey, but I think the mental side, if I could equip that area, I'm sure there's going to be a follow-on effect. And I notice this constantly in the best athletes in the world, or even Australia. You look at the top athletes like a Usain Bolt, or even go back to the greats like Muhammad Ali or whatever. You hear them speak, and it's very clear that there's a big connection between the belief or the correlation between their mind and their body. So I've got no doubt that there's a huge benefit there. But say an athlete comes to you and says, okay, Dubbo, I'm a silver medalist, but I want to take it to the gold. Where on earth do you start with something like that? Because I can imagine there's a lot of areas they could potentially improve, and even a lot of aspects of their mind that they could adjust to make the improvement.
Yeah, so, it always starts with vision. So, therefore, they've just pitched me vision. So, I'll check the vision's authenticity. Yeah. Because sometimes people say, you say, do you want to do really well in your final year of school? They go, yeah. I go, no, you don't. Nobody wants to do well. It's a social obligation. So, it's a lie. So, I've got to check where that's coming from. And I'm trying to get it so that what I'm looking for is, does the idea of it give them some excitement or make them a little bit nervous. It should bring a smile to their face. If they've only got a frown when they talk about it and it's worry, usually by that point, all their energy is going almost like an internal combustion. So I've got to get them to, they like the idea of it. So sometimes I might have to expand on that a little bit more. Say, all right, if it's gold, which tournaments are you thinking? What time frames? And we just sort of flush it out until it sounds exciting. And then it'll always fit into two. So the next question is skill, but I'll verify it by asking, I've got to check, is it a skill set or a mindset? So, someone might go, I'm the best piano player in the world, but they can't play the piano. So that's delusion. So the other things, we've all had a friend who plays an instrument. You say, please play us a song. They go, I'm not very good. And you're like, I'll play the bloody piano. So what I've got to check is, do they have the skill? And sometimes that's a discussion with their coach, with them. What are your previous results? How much you're actually behind by? If you're coming second, how much is that behind by? And so we've got to do some due diligence in the skill area, because belief can only maximize what you're really capable of. And then we would have a discussion about the mental side. Now, the easiest, simplest tool, there's plenty of conversation to have, but you might have heard me talk about before, I call it best day thinking. And that is, there's thoughts you have when you're at your best, and we want to understand those as a pattern. So if I'm going to have a barbecue typically has sausages and hamburgers and maybe some bread and tomato sauce, and it's cooked on a hot plate. Now, if I bring all that stuff inside and cook it on the pan, that's not really a barbecue anymore. The hamburgers and sausages is not a barbecue because it had to be on the hot plate. Now, if you think about your mental state, it's the same thing, is that there's an authenticity what runs through your head on a great day. So we've all had a time when we've been at our best, and there's actually been something on your mind on that day and something you've been focusing on. So an easy one, and there's an audio I'll give you a link to so that people can listen to me talk about this, workshop it for free. I'm happy to share it.
Yeah.
That there's an easy one would be when an athlete on the day they know they're going to lose, they look across at their athletes and they're like, oh my gosh, they're so good. And so they observe how awesome their opponents are. And there's another day that same athlete knows they're going to win. I'm like, well, what were you thinking on that day? And we dig around a little bit. I'll say, what did you think when you saw the other athletes? And they'll say, oh, I don't know, it's nice they try, I guess.
Yeah.
So it's the same stimulus, that it's a different mental response. And so one of the things I will do is actually flush out, when you're at your best, what is it you're obsessed with? What are you focusing on? What's on your mind? And it can be really odd things. But I know for me, for skiing, for example, I'm not a very good skier, but when I ski, there'll be times I'm about to lose it, and I instinctively just go, I got it, I got it, I got it, I got it, and I'll repeat, I've got it, I got it, I got it, and I'm holding on to this turn on a black run or something, and I should not be on this run. And it's amazing, there's this absolute focus in making sure that edge holds and I'm not coming off. But I remember another time learning how to ride a horse, and I can ride, but I was on a show jumping horse, and these things are like driving a Ferrari, and I'm pulling back on the reins thinking, that's what you do. You pull back on the reins, you make the horse stop. But, my idea of pulling back on the reins, this is a thoroughbred. It's just looking for a tiny tweak. And I'm yanking this thing back. I'm tearing the horse's head off. And I'm going around in circles in this bloody pen. And the girl is a fantastic rider, and she's in the middle watching. She's laughing. And I'm going, I got it, I got it. I'm about to fly off this thing. I'm like, I got it, I got it. And out of the blue, she just goes, oh, he's gone. And I remember looking across at her going, what? And I got launched off because she'd broken my mental state. Oh. And I'm on the ground, just writhing in pain, and she's taking photos of me, thinks it's the funniest thing. But therefore, I had it. Even though the skill wasn't there, the mental state was bringing out the best of what I was capable of. But as soon as the mental wasn't available, then the skill broke down. So there's ways to think. So that might be one of the first places I would go to. And then off the back of that, there's usually an identity or a way you might describe yourself at that time. You might find that, you're like, as a runner, you're like, well, I'm on air, or I'm just, I'm in flow, or I'm just, and there's this, and once you have that feeling, you can just run all day without any discomfort.
Yeah.
So, right, continue that response. So, like when you were running, for example, when you were at your best, what was it that you were either enjoying about the run or obsessing about or focused on? Like, when were you at your best? What were you doing?
Yeah, well, for me personally, I think the first thing that comes into my mind is I remember probably the best race I ever had. It was at the 2009 Bay Sheffield race. It was like a pro handicapped race in South Australia, and I was starting from scratch. And there were two other guys that were the favourites for the race. They were starting 10 metres ahead of me. But I just remember going into this race, and the first thing I noticed was how fresh my body felt. I felt like I was in a flow state of sorts, and it's funny because I remember standing on the start line, and I had actually originally been asked to start off the 10-metre handicap, and I don't know what happened, but the handicappers had made a mistake and asked me if I would start 5 metres back. So meaning I'd have to run the furthest distance of anyone in the race. Wow. And I remember I was standing with my dad and my pop at the time. And I got excited, and I just, for some reason, felt confident. I knew that I was a good chance at this race. I knew how good I felt. And I said to the handicapper, mate, put me all the way back to scratch, which was another 5 metres, which was going to make it better. And I remember standing on the start line, and my dad sort of looked at me and smiled, and I just looked at him and I nodded my head as if to say, no, we got this. So I think that was a big thing that I noticed was, first of all, like my body just felt up and about. I was ready to go. And secondly, I was just so aware of, you mentioned running on air, I was so aware of the feeling of how light I was. They were probably the feelings I noticed most on the best performances of my life.
You're right. And so what's happening there is that we've got to look at the skill set and how you've got your body feeling fresh, which is a science of its own, but often it's not that hard. Often, like you have probably had a good mental decision early where you decided to taper. Some people go, I'll just do one more session because I want to keep having that feeling of feeling fit, when in actual fact, they've got to have a mental attitude that says, no, I'm going to let my body rest. But then as you got closer, that whole idea of like, I've got it, like I'll bring it on, or like I'm invincible, that's what's going through your head at that point. And we're just doing it quite crassly now. But once we've got that awareness, that means that if I wanted to get you to run really well and you're having a bad day, I would go and whisper to your dad and say, just before he runs, just give him a nod.
Yeah.
And now your dad nods as in, come on, son. And you're like, fuck, yes. That's the art. That's the subtlety. Like, you can see, I only have that conversation with you once, and years from now, I could actually just get your dad to do that, or somebody you're really close to, and that will impact you.
Just an immediate change to state.
Yeah. Now, it's not the only thing. Like, you can still come last, but what it's doing is it's at least making sure that the thing that was the problem was not your mental state. And then we can find out, I wasn't as fresh as I thought, or I was getting a bit arrogant there, or that guy's a bloody quick runner. So when you say, where do we start? Well, first we have the vision, and then I'll check skill set, and then an easy tool to go to would be the best day thinking tool. And people can go to, like, on my website, which is my nickname, dobbo.com.au. The .au is for Australia, for international listeners.
Dobbo, we've got about 10 minutes left. I thought I've still got a few questions I'd love to ask you. This stuff just, it blows my mind. So I get so excited hearing someone like you speak about it. I just think it's so relevant. I think it's so exciting for people who are, just wanting to improve any area of their life. It's nice to know that there's other strategies to use than what they've been using that may not have been working up until now. But I mean, a lot of people around the world look to you, and I'm one of those for guidance, and I continually stop by your blog and stop by your website just to see what's happening in your world. But who do you look to, Dobbo? Is there anyone that you continually go back to in order to, get a little more knowledge or get a little refresher? Are there books or documentaries that you read that you'd recommend to other people?
Well, I love an autobiography. I think you learn a lot just hearing someone else's story. It sort of gives you permission for your own story, both your strengths and your failings. I think when I was young, the first book I read was Anthony Robbins' Awaken the Giant Within.
Yeah. And
I have revisited his knowledge a lot. And that being said, I also had about a 10-year period where I didn't want to listen to any Robbins. And because I think that there's there's almost like two strategies for going through life, either spiritual or mental and mechanical, if you like. And sometimes in the early days, Robbins was all about NLP and about making these changes. You can just, and it was so focused and deliberate, and I was much more flow. And in his most recent work, I was on his program recently, David Destiny, and it's just a life-changing experience. It's just, I did it 20 years ago, and I went back and did it again. And he's really evolved, and he says, geez, I really I used to be really heavy on that NLP stuff. Now he's much more spiritual. So, but if you ask who I keep revisiting, his principles are still really, really solid and sound, and I believe he's a really good man. And doesn't mean you have to agree with everything. The other thing is that I'm absolutely passionate about. There's a book called Conversations with God, and that was a really powerful impact on me. So Robbins, for example, he's got his UPW program. I've done it 10 times because I just want to keep really understanding it and keep going on the journey. Conversation with God, I've read that book 10 times, and that's been really powerful. I'm really fascinated by Walt Disney, and so I have an audio book about how to be like Walt, which I'm sure there's got a little bit of mail on it because, but it's a 23-hour audio book, and I would have listened to that 1,000 times or more. I tend to, these are people that have strong. I think Wayne Dyer is really a fascinating cat too. I didn't like his early work, but I really love. What was it called? It's just escaped me. His more recent book. It's a shame. I really love this book. Anyway, I'll come back to you. But
Yeah.
Wayne Dyer's later work I really thought was great. And Tim Ferriss is a big influence, mainly because of who he gets you access to. And that being said, this might be a long answer for 10 minutes, but I hope it's valuable. I've also taken a long time to create groups of friends that are really, really great mentors and people to bounce stuff off. And I have these dinners, I call them the cast, or either dinners or days allocated where I get people who would challenge me. We don't really hang out. We're not really friends, but we respect each other's work, and we all share our goals for an afternoon or a day. And we do that pretty regularly through the year. And I have to keep getting different groups because the groups sort of change, and you sort of get over it a little bit at some people. So, but they're the influences, I would think.
Yeah, beautiful job. And that book that we can't remember, was it Wayne Dyer? We'll make sure that we'll get that organised and put it in the show notes so everyone has access to it. But just on one of the final notes is there's obviously an infinite amount of knowledge and things that you have access to, and there's constantly ways to improve your game. But one thing I'm really interested in is how do you switch off, Dobbo? What do you do when it's time to go to bed and you don't want to think about what you've been talking about any longer? Do you have any little routines that you implement?
Not really. I've always been very good at switching off. I remember my mum said to me when I was a kid, Mark, she noticed very young, she said, Mark, people will give you your problems and they will tell you all about them. And she said, it's like when somebody, that pours it into the glass. And if they pour poison into a glass, you don't have to drink it. And they can just pour in the glass and you can just accept it's there. And I wasn't trying to be smart, but I was like, yeah, Mum, I know. And because I've heard the most horrific of problems and challenges through the years, and I've never sort of lost a lot of sleep over that stuff. Switching off though, I do feel better if I go to the gym because I think it's really important to be physical. I don't go all the time, but when I go, I'm like it's a regular part of my life. Has been for 25 years something. And also, I love old movies. I just love them. I love the romance. I love the craft. I love a 4-hour movie like Lawrence of Arabia. I'm like, it wasn't long enough. And also I think, honestly, when the younger days, I probably didn't switch off as much as I do now. So I didn't worry about work, but I was always passionate about growing. As I got older, I started to realize that made me socially, I got pushed away, if you like, almost. And really, I started to learn the ability just to laugh, and that you didn't always have to be growing. And there's a certain sense where you sort of hit a tipping point where you feel comfortable with who you are. You don't have to change the world. And that way you can just laugh. And if you do want to change the world, you go, yeah, good, let's do it. Let's do it tomorrow after we finish this bottle of wine. So there's definitely been some growth there.
Yeah, perfect, man. And lucky last question before I let you go, Dobbo. And one thing I'm really interested just to hear from each guest is there one thing that you think more people need to know? If there's one message that you could leave with people, what would it be?
Wow. I think people, I think, 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 underestimate kindness. And I think that people very often begin with the premise that if they achieve something, they'll be good. And I really feel that you are good. So do something.
Yeah.
And I think that fundamental awareness that you've got nothing to prove to the world. All you've got to do is, if you got something to share. And if people knew they were a good person, they wouldn't need to be as mean to others to assert it.
Dobbo.
There you go,
man. That is a great point. That's a great point. I'm really excited to have the chance to chat with you, man. It's one that I'd wanted to contact you about for a little while, so I'm glad we could make the time. And hey, just before I let you go, man, you're a big influence, you're a big inspiration. I'm excited to introduce you to hopefully a few new people who have can now go and discover your work, because I can't recommend it highly enough. So thanks for making the time, man.
You're welcome. And Wishes Fulfilled was the book.
Oh, well played. Well played. Yeah, very good. I'll make sure I include it there so anyone can access it.
Yeah. And then my next one's 7 Conversations for Success. And well, I'll send you a copy. Send me an address.
Man, beautiful. No, I really appreciate that. Hey, I'll be back in Australia in December, man. So I'd love to revisit a conversation,
Sure.
Maybe do one over a coffee or something.
Done. All right. Chat to you later.
Ladies and gents, that was Mark Dobson. I told you he was good. All show notes for that are at tysonpopplestone.com/podcast. I'll include everything we mentioned there. So if you want to go and get a bit of a taste, that's where you go for it. Guys, that is enough from me for this week. I'm excited for next week's guest, and I hope you are too. Hope you guys are enjoying this. Don't forget, any feedback, any updates, anything you want to let me know, feel free to shoot me an email. Just contact me through the website. Click the contact button. You didn't need to be told that. You know where it was. Guys, I'll speak to you real soon. Big love from London.